Welcome to Beyond Westminster. I'm Fraser Nelson, and today we're going to be discussing what is, for many parents, the main dilemma of our times, the intersection of smartphones, social media, and mental health, and what, if anything, the government could or should do about it. We have the Safer Phones Bill making its way through the Commons, but is it enough? I'm delighted to be joined today by three distinguished guests to help me unpack this. We have Kit Malthouse, Tory MP and former Deputy Mayor of London who co-sponsored the Safer Phones Bill, and Sanjiv Nichani, who's a consultant paediatrician who coined the term Screen-Demic to describe the impact of screen time on children's health, and Sophie, Winkleman, the acclaimed actress and charity sponsor who's also a campaigner advocating the protection of children from the harms of smartphones and social media. So Kit, can I start with you? You co-sponsored the Safer Phones Bill. Do you really think that this is a problem that government could or should try to solve? I mean, you're a Conservative, and Conservatives tend to be laissez-faire in such things.
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I come at this from the point of view as a parent with a pair of teenagers. So I've got the same struggles at home as so many parents do. As an MP who's been talking to schools extensively in the constituency about the problems that they're facing, but also sitting on the Science and Technology Select Committee, and so understanding how these very large tech companies, which broadly seem to be in charge of how our young people think, the techniques and devices and algorithms that they use to try and hook people in. And so while I totally understand your challenge that, you know, as a Conservative, you should stand back and let people, and in particular parents, do what they may, this is not at the moment a fair fight, right? So I feel as if I am in daily battle for my children with these large, massive media firms, which are bigger than nations and who are much smarter and cleverer than me at hooking my children's attention, at the same time as battling against the kind of societal tyranny that says your child must have this device because everybody else does. And so, you know, when you hear parents effectively crying across the table from you about the disasters that have befallen their children through whatever it might be, Snapchat, and we've had some terrible cases coming through, you do feel like you do need to act, yeah. And so I sponsored the bill. I have to say, I sponsored the bill in the hope that it would turn into something. The day before we all appeared in the House, it was pretty clear the government had completely filleted it and made it a nothing. And as I said, it was a sort of on the day, it's a kind of meaningless gesture that they've turned this bill into, where there was actually an opportunity there. So
just to be clear here, the bill that you co-sponsored, you think, has effectively been erased?
Oh yeah, completely. It's a pointless exercise now. It's a nonsense.
So it's been dropped without being dropped, is it?
Yeah, it's been dropped without being dropped, and you know, for the sake of appearance, it's being allowed to proceed, but actually, it's a sort of hollow man. There's nothing there really that's of any worth or that will make any immediate difference in what I described on the day, which is smoking for the brain. Right, we're now realising in pretty fast time, and the evidence is mounting daily of the damage that these phones and these social media apps are doing to particularly teenage children, but young children too. And a bit like smoking, when everybody in the 50s and 60s thought it was good for you, we're now suddenly realising that actually it isn't.
Dr. Nichani, you've come up with the phrase Screen-Demic. That gives us an idea of where you're coming at this from. But can you say a bit more about why you think this is, you know, a genuine medical issue? I mean, right now, so little is known, really. The studies are still information. Do we have enough to say that this is genuinely a real and present threat to children's mental health?
There's absolutely no question about it. So let me just flesh out the Screen-Demic, why I call it the Screen-Demic. Screen-Demic is the epidemic of mental health illness in children and young people, as well as early developmental problems in childhood, secondary to excessive screen time and social media use. What I'm seeing at the coalface, I'm horrified by it, and I'm terrified as to what it's doing to our children and our future generations. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, my personal opinion, it's poisoning our children.
You say at the coalface, sorry. What do you mean by that?
My clinics. So my clinics, each and every day, I see toddlers who walk into my clinic room, so 2 or 3 year olds who walk into my clinic room, normal mobility, normal coordination, they don't say a word. Non-verbal. They have this glazed appearance on their face. They are drawn to inanimate objects. And when you delve into what's happening on a day-to-day basis at home, you're told that many of these children, a very significant percentage, spend the majority of their time in front of a screen. watching a screen is passive. You learn language by listening to vocabulary from siblings, parents, grandparents, friends, etc., by interacting with your environment. So it starts at that age. And then the other end of the spectrum, again in my clinics, I see teenagers who are listless, who are lethargic, who are sleeping poorly, who have inattention. Many are the characteristics of ADHD, actually. But actually, they don't have ADHD. They have acquired ADHD or secondary ADHD to excessive screen time and social media app use, depression, anxiety, poor self-esteem. In terms of evidence, as far as I'm concerned, there's a very clear causal link. There's no longer debate about this. The evidence is the size of the elephant in the room, actually, that the government is ignoring. There's a huge amount of evidence, irrefutable evidence, incontrovertible evidence, linking very clearly a causal link between excessive screen time and social media use across the ages, including in young adults. And if you go further, there is a new entity you'll hear more and more about called digital dementia. So this screens and social media in the last 15 years has completely upended civilization. And we really, really need to take stock. I mean, the irony is that the government doesn't want to be seen to be telling people what to do, what they call nanny statism. The supreme irony is, of course, if the government is not doing that, the bill is impotent in my view. However, the government has to pick up the pieces.
We can go back to Sophie. Can you say a little bit about why you decided to get involved in this? I mean, you've been involved in various causes over the years, but you really got quite involved in this particular topic.
I think it started when I became patron of an education charity and visited schools like Kit all over the country. And I saw it with my own eyes. Teens would talk to me, teachers would talk to me, and teachers said it's breaking our hearts because our brightest pupils cannot concentrate anymore. Rather than just seeing harmful material, which is obviously a huge issue, children who just see rapid-fire, short-form videos, even if it's cats falling down the stairs, cannot concentrate. And, a lot of the children in schools I visited are up all night long on these screens. They come into school, they're very exhausted and angry, they eat rubbish to stay awake, and the teachers were telling me it's completely destroying their life chances. I think some middle-class parents are getting galvanised and saying, right, we're going to have collective action, and all sorts of great grassroots movements are helping them. But I worry about the other children whose parents are either very, very busy, too busy to do this, absent, whatever. The government has to step in to look after all these children.
You make an interesting point there, Sophie, in talking about the middle-class parents, because I suppose, say you're a single mum, if you're working, you have in these screens a digital babysitter.
Totally.
You have something to give your kids, and you can tell yourself they're watching Baby Einstein or something. But my point is, it basically takes care of child rearing for you. So you can see how this is something which, getting upset about this in a way is something you can do if you can afford to do this, if you can afford to be spending the extra time with your kids. So do you see this as a social issue? I mean, my point is of social and economic equality as well as general health.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating all of us. It's thrilling that there's some pockets of action, but going around the country, I was in Bradford a couple of weeks ago, I was in Liverpool a couple of months ago, Dagenham, Weston-super-Mare. A lot of parents around there are far too busy and worried about all sorts of other things to think about their child's screen time. And they are crying out to be able to say to their teens, this is illegal. Don't shout at me. It's illegal. It's not my fault.
Right.
They would love it.
Because that's a really important point here, is the argument which this involves with the kids. So, of course, I suppose any parent can say, no, this is bad. Any parent can have the argument with their kid. But the kind of social pressure, I know this as a parent myself, is more, A, you're cutting me off from my friends, B, this is how we communicate if I don't, and C, I went into my daughter's room last night, she was doing her homework with her phone there, right? And I was saying, why on earth do you have this phone? I took it off her. No, Daddy, you can't do that, because they've given us the homework on the screen.
Yeah.
And I actually found to my shock that the teachers had done exactly that. They'd emailed them the homework, because of course it's easier for the teachers. But there are lots of reasons to lose this argument. So Kit, I guess that is the rationale for the government coming to make it illegal, because parents find that they just can't win the argument normally.
I think that's right. Parents and indeed schools. I mean, one of the key things in the bill was a ban on phones in schools. And what teachers have told me is that they, in an atmosphere of increasing aggression from parents towards teachers, having the ability to lay it off on the government. It's not me that's making the decision in the school. It's the government. It's illegal. Just takes the pain away. It's a bit like the fines for not attending school for unauthorised absence, where head teachers get to decide. That should be taken away, because that becomes a huge bone of contention between the two. So we need to think about these things. But to be honest with you, Fraser, when you start unpeeling this onion, it reveals all sorts of other horrors that we've ignored. And in fact, if we were using our intelligence, the smartphone and the advent of screens more widely has revolutionised every part of our lives. And yet we haven't looked at the impact on every part of our lives. So, for example, one of the things that teachers have told me is that finding young children first coming into school with quite significant attachment problems, and they're putting it down to the fact that in their early months, they're not getting the facial contact with their parents because their parents are on their phone or on a screen. And so, it's critical in the first few months of life that you get that facial contact, you learn that connection. And if your parent's looking away, it's one of the reasons why, parents in the know have a pram that faces towards you. Yes. So that as you're walking along, you get the facial contact, those kind of things.
Just to jump in, you saying about children not looking at their parents and having the eye contact. I went to a school in Ashford, Damien Macbeth's school in Ashford a few weeks ago, and he has to call parents to say, remember to look up off your phones when your kids run out to see you. If you're not looking at them when they first run out, something inside their little souls.
Right, I mean, when the school bell goes, they go off to meet mum and dad, and all they see is a sea of faces on the phones.
Sea of phones.
Right. Dr. Nichani, wasn't the same thing said about television back in the day? That if you watch it, you'll get square eyes. There's all sorts of doom and gloom, which my generation remembers very well. You can't watch Grange Hill, you turn into a delinquent, that kind of stuff. Which we now look back as being a straightforward pattern of emerging technology, the fear of emerging technology, the alarmism, which eventually is proven to be unfounded. Couldn't we simply be on the same cycle here? Because as parents, we don't quite understand this world that they're in. We don't quite understand what it means to be involved in 5 or 6 chat groups at a school. When the child tells us that social life is now digitised, especially, by the way, after lockdown, when the government made it illegal for children to socialise with each other, we don't really have an answer to that. So, I mean, what I'm asking is can we really be... did you have your equivalents 25, 30 years ago saying the television would basically shrink people's brain in a way that you're saying now?
No, but I think you've summed it up yourself, because you said we have no idea what our children are doing. When we were watching television, A, it was at a distance, B, it was a more communal experience. We've done, I'm part of Health Professionals for Safer Screens, which is an advocacy group, and basically we have said, depending on the age, it should be not more than 1 or 2 hours of screen time. Anything beyond that is unhealthy.
Screen time, by the way, do you include television in that?
Yes, absolutely, because otherwise the child is sitting in front of a screen doing very little else. There should be more green time, less screen time. But going back to the television and the comparison of what's happening today, there are no apps on television. Well, there are available now, but TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, etc., which there are dangerous viral challenges, there are influencers, there's peer pressure, there's comparisons, there's FOMO, there's misogyny, there's pornography. All of that is available in this pocket device, poisoning our children, which was not present with televisions. As I said, it was mainly a communal experience.
Well, I'm going to challenge you there. On pornography, you can get... most families have got Wi-Fi in their house. Most of these Wi-Fis have filters to stop pornography.
Kids are very smart. They know how to get around these. I did a school meeting just earlier this week, and this mum told me, I have no idea how to stop my son. He's ingenious on getting around these blocks that we're putting in, because they're much more tech savvy than many of us are. And that's the issue here.
And you can't pick up a television and take it around with you for the entire day.
This is what, when I was talking to to teachers in my constituency just last month, we had a summit, and they said, look, if you said to kids, you can take your game console, your television, your hi-fi and your computer to school every day with you, would you really expect them to concentrate on what what they're doing. The other thing, just to say, Fraser, and in previous generations, the amount of kids' television was limited. And there was definitely a tendency by the whatever we had then, 3-4 broadcasters, to kind of limit and be responsible about what they produced. I mean,
well, there wasn't much audience, right? It had to be between school and dinner time, right?
yeah, it had to be school and dinner time, and there was nothing. There might be a bit on Sunday morning, but that was kind of it. And in fact, in my day, we even had a program called Why Don't You, which was Why Don't You Switch Off the Television Set and Go do something less boring instead, was the full title of the show. And a lot of shows were designed to stimulate kids doing other things. Blue Peter was all about going and doing other things. Magpie was all about going and doing other things, instead of being designed to kind of suck you in. The other thing I just wanted to say is that one of the aspects of screens, which parents talk to me about quite often, I'd be interested in your views, is the fact that the only source of conflict in their house now is screens.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
even if you put those limits on, I mean, we have very strong limits in my house, on their phones and on the Wi-Fi. It's a constant battle.
So it's a phone and you limit the Wi-Fi in your house, do you?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I have a router that allows me to control each of their devices and what they can and can't access.
Oh, I haven't heard of
It
that one.
allows me to limit the time.
Right, but Sophie, isn't that? I mean, every phone pretty much has got screen time, right? The parents can go up and they can decide via the control. They've got all their kids and they come up here. If you've got an Apple phone, you can say, okay, Sammy's getting 1 hour, Sophie's getting 2 hours. They can have X many minutes, WhatsApp X many minutes. So surely the tools for controlling screen time are already in parents' hands.
Well, kids are unusually on it, and most parents, including me, don't have the time and organisation to do that. We're doing lots of other things, and it's, as you say, kids are brilliant at getting around that. And I just think that's far too much for the parent to do. And I also think, when you said your daughter had got her homework via a screen, this is a mega epidemic that also needs a very sharp torch.
It's absolutely shocking. I don't know, so if you've noticed this, but Eton School has got a complete ban now. So I think if you're year 9, I think typically age 13, you can't even show up to Eton with a mobile phone. It's against the rules. Interesting, the most expensive school in the world is doing that, because they must know something. But because we do see now a kind of like the top end schools, if you want, kind of acting more on this, but in a way that even the cheaper private schools are, let alone the state schools, a lot of them have got a lot more things to worry about.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's not just now the private schools. So Barnet, I think 120 schools across Barnet have moved together and gone phone free.
So by phone free, because there's lots of definitions of phone free, aren't there? There's not in the classroom, there's not in the corridor, there's not in the school premises, there's
not bringing to, and that's the other critical thing, right? The social interaction between kids on the way to and from school is totally critical. And the campaign that a lot of schools are adopting is this bricks by 26, right? We want everybody on just a brick phone, right? But you shouldn't underestimate, as I say, just going back to the point I was saying about the battle at home, the phrase that every parent dreads is the, Dad, I just need to. Right, I just need you to relax the rules because I've got to get my homework, or my friend needs to know about X, Y, Z, or I have to text. Or the other one that is totally, in many ways, criminal is these websites which gamify education and then they trap people in with this notion of a streak. Right, I've got to maintain my streak. Right,
you're talking about Snapchat, aren't you?
Well, Snapchat has streak, but I think Duolingo has streak. There's lots of them have these streak. This idea that you've got to do every day.
It's the same business
to maintain
model.
your streak.
It's time on device.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Snapchat is, I think, the age recommendation for that is 13.
Yes.
Shouldn't it be very easy to say to Apple, we want, if you've got an Apple ID, and by the way, I'm just talking about Apple here, but it's a big thing. An Apple ID knows how old you are. It knows how old the kid is. You can't get Apple Pay, for example, if you're below a certain age, because Apple knows how old you are. Couldn't you just say to Apple that we want these age limits to be binding? That if the phone shows a child to be under 13, they shouldn't be able to download any app, which is, to me, this seems easy, doable, less controversial. We just say to Apple, this isn't a matter of the law, but we would like you as a good digital company not to download on any device any app which is got an age rating higher than that which you know the kid's age to be.
Yeah, so to be fair, this is coming, right? So the online safety bill,
Instagram
which is
and
now
that.
rolling out, right, and is giving Ofcom the power to enforce, much stronger age verification.
But is it going to do what
Techniques.
I suggested? I don't think it is.
So I don't think it's going to quite do that. And in fact, if you are on the Apple platform and you want to put a children's phone on the kind of family sharing and family control thing, you can't do it for a child that's over 13. Right? It will allow you to do one for 12, but over 13 you can't. And yet much of the damage is done for people who are between 13 and...
Right. So this is exploring the notion for self-regulation, right? Because if you tend to be inclined against regulation, as I personally would do, you'd want to see to the, okay, can the companies basically acknowledge this concern? And really, what legitimate interest could they have in, for example, allowing the underage downloading of games?
Fraser, the email communications in the tech companies is full of disgruntled employees who are talking about what they know what this is doing. Mark Zuckerberg had crocodile tears in a Senate hearing. We looked back at bereaved parents and said, "Oh, I'm sorry," but I mean that's a lot of nonsense. These tech companies, in my opinion, are like rogue nation states. They know exactly what it's doing to our children, and they're doing nothing about it.
We are not the only country to have this debate. It's happening world over. Now, kids, if you had to point to any jurisdiction, or sorry, either you two, if you had to point to any jurisdiction where you think legislation has come in and it's working, what would you point to? I know there's some American states who are doing this, and the Australians are having a fairly go at who is getting it right?
So Norway has banned smartphones in school, and within
Sorry,
12.
again, can we define ban smartphones?
So no child under 16 walks into school with a smartphone. So
we're
in a
talking
pouch,
possession
in
of
a
a smart-
pouch. Yeah, correct. So in a pouch at reception, basically. So no access to the smartphone for 8 or 9 hours that they're in school. And they have noticed a sea change amongst the kids. Of course, there's a huge conflict amongst the kids because they're not happy with this. Because some kids are saying, well, actually, what if I need to call my parent? Well, there's a phone in school to call your parent. What if my parent, what if there's an emergency? All of those answers, all of that will be provided by the school. But the behavior in class has changed, the interaction has changed, the toilet breaks have plummeted, there's less fights.
So there are studies showing this. It sounds pretty anecdotal.
Well, no, it's there are studies showing this, indeed, very much so.
I'm going to jump in. I think because we're the sort of highest gobbler-upper of ed tech in this country, we can't have the conversation about smartphones and children without having the conversation about ed tech, because the internet-enabled devices in the schools can do pretty much everything that a smartphone can do, and anecdotally and clinically, learning on a screen is no substitute for learning from books and writing and handwriting. It really isn't. EdTech is good for robotics, computer animation, sound and music engineering, spreadsheets. It's good for all the stuff that's technical, obviously it is. But pretty much every other subject is better learned, and it's not old-fashioned. It's what all the progressive schools in California are doing. They're going back to books.
So you're saying that there are studies showing that if you're reading from a textbook as opposed to a screen,
Yes.
writing on a page as opposed to a laptop, then you are learning better.
Yes, much more profoundly.
So Sweden have actually banned EdTech
Exactly.
now.
They've kicked
They've
all
gone
their
back to
devices
banning
out of the classroom. They've been very brave. They've said EdTech was a failed experiment. They've been very brave and they're doing very, very well.
I've got a head teacher in my constituency who she's just taken over a school in Andover where every child at the start of their school career was given a Chromebook, and she thinks it's been a disaster, and so she's taking them all back. She's stopping and going back to your kind of standard stuff, which is much better for memory, social interaction with a teacher, all that kind of stuff.
And just health professionals for Safer Screens, your group, have said it's just so terrible for the eyesight, the posture, the hormones, the sleep rhythms to be on a screen. So the fact that the schools are now complicit in what big tech are doing, many parents are very angry about it.
But what about the argument, Sophie, that are we really preparing these people for the world when they go into an office? They're going to be on screens the whole time. They're going to be sending emails. They're not going to be writing letters.
You can learn digital literacy in IT. It doesn't have to bleed into every other subject.
At least they will have had a childhood on the way.
I think the best way to address this is statistics. So Leicester City Council do a survey of children's well-being every 5 years. The most recent study of 3,000 children showed that between 30 and 35% of teenagers spend 5 or 6 hours each and every day on screens,
Outside
on these
of school
apps.
hours.
Outside of school hours. So recreation, what I call recreational screen, that's an addiction. There's absolutely no question about that. That's an addiction. So these are the statistics we're dealing with, and I'm seeing it in my clinic all the time.
But is it really an addiction? Isn't this simply the way that childhood is emerging? That in my day, you might have gone out playing, perhaps drinking, right? We know that alcohol use has gone down a lot amongst children, which is quite striking. But that's part of a function, of the way they basically spend their free time communicating with each other.
So what this is symptomatic of is a phone-based and a phone-controlled childhood. What you're describing, and what I certainly experienced, and yes, people might say you're an old fuddy-duddy, which is true, is I grew up in a play-based childhood. So my response is, you choose which is better. And the evidence is telling us that actually a play-based childhood is much healthier than a phone-based and a phone-controlled childhood that our children and young people are suffering from. So many teenagers tell you, please take our phones away. But they have to be part of this virtual society, because otherwise they get ostracized, and it's not fair on them. So there's got to be systematic and societal change to deal with this as a collective, and the government has a role here.
But Sanjiv, you're a doctor, you will also know that the way that young people now are way less likely to smoke, way less likely to drink, and probably less likely to take drugs, though I haven't seen those figures. These surely must be welcome trends.
They are good for physical health, but their brains are being poisoned by what's happening digitally.
Would you say that outweighs the physical health?
Yes, very much so. Because it leads to depression, anxiety. They're at home. Even gamers, it's exactly the same thing. The same argument and debate and evidence for gamers. Brain changes. And going back to a point you made earlier on, parenting is very difficult. Of course, we recognize that. Two parents are working, or single parents having to do so many things and to cope. However, if you told most parents that if you allow your child at an early age to be on a device, they might not communicate properly, there'll be a setback in school, and your teenager to spend 5 or 6 hours because you're busy, and that's going to cause brain changes, everybody will sit up.
I think that's an important thing to sort of expand the argument on. It's not just mental health, which people find it very easy to brush under the carpet for some reason. It's neurological damage. It's not just emotional damage. The brain changes are really terrifying. I mean, lots of teenagers can't sit through a film anymore. Yeah. They find it far too boring, let alone read a book. I mean, there's no chance.
It's so funny. It's like boredom has become unacceptable in childhood.
Right.
And that's where the imagination kicks in.
Yeah, there's a Gallic expression saying that there's nothing wrong with a bored child. That boredom is yeah, exactly. But Sophie, earlier on you were saying of the many ways kids have around, for example, screen time blockers, etc. Is that not the argument against the sort of legislating? Because no matter what government does, kids will find a way around it. So we're talking here about a solution which is very unlikely to solve the problem, because they'll find a way of presenting themselves as being a different age, of having I'm not quite sure what they will do. From what you're saying, like water, they'll always find a way.
Well, I think if it's illegal, it would be so much fewer. It's really worth going for. I don't think children should have any internet-enabled device before they're 16.
I mean, apart from anything else, why do I have to figure it out? Why is that my job? These guys, Mark Zuckerberg, whoever is behind these things, they're much smarter than me. They know exactly what they're doing. Why is it my job to figure it out?
This question comes to the heart of the case for or against prohibition. It's your job because you're a parent. This is your responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility to bring up your kid.
No, that's certainly true. But as I said to you right at the start, it's not a fair fight, right? So absolutely, if I knew that what they were producing was controllable, wholesome, whatever, it's not. But we know from things that they are using algorithms and techniques to hook our children.
Yes.
Right, they're using it to pull them in. Now, one of the things that was in the bill, this filleted bill, was raising the digital age of consent to 16, which meant that social media companies couldn't process the data of people under 16, and so therefore couldn't look at what they're looking at and feed them more and more of it and make it addictive, right? So it's a bit like saying,
how this was
but hold on, Fraser, it's a bit like saying to me, do you know what, your kid's hooked on heroin? It's your fault, right? This thing is a narcotic, against which I haven't got a fair fight, and every parent lives in fear of it getting its hooks into their kids.
And they're unsafe products. We keep having to prove that they're blighting modern childhood in multiple ways, and the evidence is all there. We have been given no evidence by these companies that it's safe.
Can I just mention a difference in that context, and in fact both of what they've said. So TikTok is owned by ByteDance, Chinese company ByteDance. It has a completely different version in China, which I can tell you about. It's called Douyin, Douyin. So the TikTok use is limited to 40 minutes. It's not available between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The content must be scientific, cultural, educational, wholesome human stories. They're moderators who take out negative content and everything we've been talking about. And they must promote exercise and well-being and education. In the rest of the world, it's the poisonous Wild West. I have a 8-year-old girl in my clinic for a skin problem, and when I said to her mum told me she uses makeup, and I was horrified, because she's seen this on TikTok. And when I said to her, actually, it's not good for your skin, it's going to make your skin problem worse, she was in floods of tears at the age of 8 because she's seen it on TikTok. Now, that cannot be healthy.
Right. Now, Sophie, isn't there a problem here that if you're a parent trying to say to your kids, come off the screen, they're going to look at you and think, well, it's a bit hypocritical. You're always on your screen. And a lot of us are. I mean, isn't this a major problem when we come to... Because, of course, a parent might be personally convinced of the need to cut down their kids' screen time. But then again, when you look at the parents' screen time, it's not that great. And this is something which adults struggle with. So isn't this sort of the hypocrisy angle one which is as much of an impediment to this as everything else we've discussed?
Yes and no. I think parents obviously need to look at their digital habits. Of course they do. We all do. They're designed by geniuses to be totally unputdownable, which is why it's so daft to think that children can self-regulate. But children are different to adults. And, we drink wine, we occasionally smoke, we drive, we do all sorts of things, and don't say, better not do that because the children will see me having a glass of wine. I mean, adults are different, and we've got to treat children as, all the digital rights stuff. Sorry, children just have the right to be safe and looked after.
Let's say this law is passed, and all of a sudden kids start coming off the screens tomorrow. How long will neurological repair take if somebody is, as you put, addicted to mobile phones?
So that's a brilliant question. And first of all, we've already talked about this. Parents need to lead by example. When parents ask me exactly the same question, I say, in the most diplomatic language possible, your child has got an addiction. So you cannot do cold turkey to your child. You cannot say, right, from tomorrow, half an hour. That'll cause immense conflict and be very destructive. So you have to have phone-free spaces at home. When you're watching television, no phones. When you're having a meal, no phones. When you're out in the car, no phones. When you're at a restaurant, no phones. You have to shrink that 5 or 6 hours addiction down slowly but surely to something more sensible. This is not about stopping. This is about being moderate and proportionate and sensible. And over time, there's a very, very large study of 2 million teenagers studied over a period of 4 years. It showed that those teenagers who spend a lot of time participating in physical activity, in other words, more green time, less screen time, the brain changes were reversed. Not only that, they had less incidence of anxiety, depression, and ADHD. So physical activity can actually overcome, over a period of time, what tech has done to our children's brains.
Over how long a period of time?
Well, it's a year or 2 or 3. So getting down from 6 hours is not going to be easy. So we have to say to parents, you have to take your time.
Now, Kit Malthouse, you're a politician. You'll know why the government has watered this down. And that's quite simply, if you do this as a politician, you're going to be as popular as a parent. I point to you, I'm not asking you to talk about the morals of this, simply the politics of it. To do this risks political unpopularity. And that is why it's a pretty big ask for the Labour government to continue what you would have proposed in the Conservative government.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case. There does seem to be a bit of a blind spot, and I was concerned in the debate and raised it as to whether this was, falling victim to some of the debates with the Americans about trade deals, right? Because we know they're very exercised about the digital services tax, all these guys that run these big companies that are talking to our children and telling them what to think. They were all at the inauguration, right? You can't help, I'm afraid, in this age being slightly cynical, but there just seems to be a kind of blind spot about the impact that it's having. I don't think they're necessarily making a political calculation in the way about will people vote for me, won't people vote for me, because all we were saying in that bill, which was relatively simple, was you can't process people's data under 16. Well, I think most parents wouldn't really know or care. And you can in EdTech, but and we just don't want them in schools. Well, Starmer stood up and said most schools don't have them anyway at Prime Minister's Question Time, which wasn't correct, but nevertheless, that was his belief. So the obstacle to what we're trying to put in place, particularly against the backdrop of the Online Safety Act, which is rolling out. I mean, we are going to have age verification on pornography coming quite soon in July, I think. In parts of the world where they've done that, they've seen a 70% drop in usage.
Right, but you accept, however, the act of trying to ban them to children means you have to end anonymity, which itself takes you don't want to do that, but there's no way you can. There's no way you can have both of these things. Either you allow anonymous use of things, and that when it comes to restricting use for any age group, there is a wider principle at stake.
Well, there are. Look, I mean, first of all, on things like pornography, having age verification, I don't think anybody is going to and ending.
If you want to go onto a certain porn site,
yeah.
Right? But if you want to Google, if you want to use,
but the point is, these guys who design these things are super smart. They are perfectly able to identify what I'm interested in, what my patterns of use are, and then advertise appropriately to me, and they do that to children too. And in certain circumstances, they can identify patterns of behaviour. I mean, if you get a MetaQuest 3D goggles, right, and you put in a false age, it will work out if you're under 13, and it will block you. And so in certain regards, there are these techniques that they can use. Now, what Ofcom decides becomes the kind of verification, age verification system is up to them. But it's perfectly possible to do it in the same way that on Instagram, they're perfectly able to identify nudity. And you don't find nudity. You find close nudity on Instagram, but you don't find it. But on other platforms, they decline to do so.
Okay. Look, we're coming to the end of the podcast, so I'd like one last question for all of you. Dr. Nichani, you've given us basically lots of figures and facts and studies today saying it's incontrovertible, the damage they do is beyond debate. I put it to you that isn't quite as clear as you suggest, that if you pick up a Jonathan Haidt book, you'll find this. But if you want to go and ask, I don't know, the Royal College of Paediatricians or whatever, then there is no real consensus along the way that you say. What do you think needs to be done before? Because right now, your voice, I don't disagree with anything that you've said, but you're certainly on the most alarmist corner of the debate. You seem completely sure that all the facts are incontrovertibly on your side. So what would need to be done for your argument to go from being an alarmist fringe to be going to the mainstream?
There has to be, particularly for children, we've talked about many reasons why children are more vulnerable. We have to adopt the safety first principle. There's no question about it. Like we do for physical health, alcohol, smoking, etc. Exactly the same applies. And as far as the Royal College are concerned, they did a document, I think in 2019, 2020. I've approached them. I've sent my infographic to them. 2019 and 20, they sat squarely on the fence. And despite the debate raging in this country, they've been asleep at the wheel. So I put it to you, what I'm seeing in my clinical setting and what many other pediatricians are seeing in their clinical, not just pediatricians, GPs, speech and language therapists, marrying that with the evidence is far more powerful what the Royal College are saying or not saying. The safety first principle must apply.
Right, but why the Royal College on the fence if what you say is so incontrovertible?
Because they're a political body as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a member of them, but they're doing nothing. They're asleep at the wheel.
What possible incentive would they have, even if they are a political body, for not basic...
Unlike the Americans who actually said outright, a child, for instance, a child under 2 must not have a screen. And they also recommend limitations to time for the other ages. Again, it's politics. I have no idea why they're not doing anything about this.
Right. Now, Sophie, you've seen this debate change a lot, even in the last 3 or 4 years. Somebody like you might not be as active as you are, like 4 or 5 years ago. How do you see it changing in the next few years? Do you think this is going to be... Does this risk becoming an obsession with the middle classes, which Westminster doesn't really take on, or do you think that we're going to be moving to we're going to be looking back in a few years' time as we now look back on the era where we had adverts with doctors saying what cigarette they preferred?
Yeah, I'm sure we will look back on it and think, what on earth were we doing? And it's, but when you said earlier, just to revert earlier, when you said, will it be very politically unpopular to suddenly take away these successful children who are now navigating their screen time, and they'll think, what on earth are you doing? There was a brilliant interview in the Times about 8 months ago of about 18 different teenagers from all over the country, and they all get about their screen use. And the question to all of them was, if this stuff was taken away from you tomorrow and all of your friends, none of you had it, would you be okay with that? And they all said yes in a very passionate way. They are desperate for grown-ups to do something. I think maybe this movement needs to be led, well, I think the doctor-led movement is very powerful, and I think it needs to be led by the young. Because, you know, there's Freya India, there's some very powerful voices from young people saying this utterly destroyed me, and I don't want my younger brothers and sisters to go through this, and why aren't the grown-ups doing anything? And I think you're right, I think it's very frustrating that it seems to just be a middle class issue at the moment. And I think all of us here who care about children just want this to be, you know, it's ubiquitous everywhere. That's why the NHS and people have to get involved, so the awareness spreads. This isn't just mental health, this is brain damage.
And Kits, you're basically not optimistic either about the progress of the bill you originally co-sponsored or about the Online Safety Act and what that's doing. But is there not something which you politicians can do? Could you not just simply say, here are a bunch of self-regulatory recommendations, if enough of you got behind it? Is there anything you can do other than forcing them both of the Commons to try to come? If you look at what happened with the press regulation, for example, the press was threatened with statutory regulation. The press responded by coming up ipso self-regulation. Now, can't something similar to that happen? But the threat of regulation the Silicon Valley don't want becomes so great, but they agree to a code of self-regulation and work could be done on what self-regulation could look like.
Well, that is the approach that's been tried hitherto. I'm not unoptimistic about the Online Safety Act. It's just rolling out, so we'll see how it develops over the next 12 or 24 months. And I've been in lots of meetings where representatives of these companies come forward and talk in glowing terms about what they've been doing to assist and how they protect young people. And, you know, YouTube has brought out YouTube Kids and they all have different techniques. But then, unfortunately, we get these email leaks that come out of internally from staff who realise that the game is up and saying that precisely the reverse is happening, and yet it continues. So I hope the Online Safety Act has an impact. I think this bill that we were talking about is defunct. It's really a nothing. It's asking for a review coming forward, and I'm not generally optimistic about seeing any significant change in the lives of our young people. I always struck, many years ago there was a Holly Hunter film called Broadcast News, which is about the flip from kind of rock solid fact-based news to more kind of sensational celebrity news. William Hurt was in it, and he was the kind of person pushing this kind of news. And in the newsroom, one of her colleagues says to her, "But when the devil comes, do you think he's going to come in a red cape and with horns and fire coming out? No, he's going to come in a suit and a tie and slowly undermine your standards." Right, well, it always reminds me of that scene, right, that here we are being slowly but surely as parents and children undermined, and it's happening without us seemingly doing very much.
Okay, well, Kit Mohas, the man with the suit and the tie, thank you very much for joining us, and Dr. Nichani and Sophie Winkleman, thank you very much as well. I've learned huge amounts from this conversation. I'm going to go back and immediately revise my kids' screen time. Not good, that will do me, if they're as clever as you say, Sophie. But thank you all once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.